Alright, what I'm going to tell you about today is how to maybe get an old PS2 up and running, or how to fix some problems that are happening with a PS2 that you own right now. There's a few problems that can happen with the PS2, and almost all of them are caused by dust. Unfortunately, the PS2 sucks in a lot of dust, and it just gets caked on in different parts. But the most fragile or the weakest area is the lens and the laser. Um, one situation that can happen is when you start up your PS2, you might hear a grinding sound or you might hear a clicking sound. Most common cause of that problem is there's two shafts that hold in this laser mechanism, and the shafts themselves have probably gotten a lot of dirt, dust, or something on them, or they've just become dry. And what happens when the laser decides to go forward, when it begins to read the disc, every time you turn it on, it gets stuck, and the gear that turns and moves this tab here, which causes this to move forward, the gear just winds up spinning, but this doesn't move anywhere, so you hear this clicking sound coming from this tab. The easiest way to fix this is to take the two shafts out. I don't have the rest of the PS2 up here right now, but take the two shafts out, clean them off, wipe them off with a cloth, and try and wipe out this area here with maybe a cotton swab or something like that, Q-tip. Once you get everything cleaned up, get yourself some white lithium grease or some kind of silicone grease, graphite, anything is okay that's that doesn't stick, something that's really smooth, and coat the shaft, put a little bit inside the holes, and put it back together. Also make sure that these gears here are clean. If they're not clean, or these teeth here, if they're not clean, when they sit down on the gear itself, they'll wind up slipping again. So make sure that the gear on your motor is clean, and make sure these teeth are clean here, and that'll end your grinding sound when you start it up. The second problem is the biggest problem here, and that is either your disc won't read, or your disc will only read blue discs, but it won't read the gold-plated or dual-layered DVD disc. And that is unfortunately a problem with the laser, but not a big problem. Here, the laser that I have today is it's a HD7 laser, and these ones are the biggest pain in the ass to work on. Most of the older model lasers are really simple, but this one you have to do a little bit more work. What a lot of people commonly do is they'll take a Q-tip and they'll use some water and they'll clean it around, or they'll just use a dry one, wipe it off, put it back in, put it together, and realize, hey, nothing's changed, it's still not reading disc. Well, the problem is, inside these lasers, there's a top, an upper laser, and then there's a bottom laser, or a bottom lens. And the top lens, it usually gets dusty, but the bottom lens itself gets more dusty than the top, and it's really hard to see. So what I'll do today is I'll show you how to clean that. Keep in mind that this is a more difficult model. The other earlier models, like the 10,000 series, 15,000 series, those ones are a lot more simple to take apart, but I'll show you the basics to this. First, what you're going to need is some Q-tips. You're going to need some water. You're going to need a small Phillips screwdriver. You're going to need a flathead screwdriver, and just a marker to mark the screws where they're located. First, what we'll do is you got to take off this plastic part. There's a couple of ways to do this. You can try to do it by hand, or you can try and do it with the flathead screwdriver. If you do it with the flathead screwdriver, make sure that you don't push in too hard or that you don't pry up too hard, because there's a chance that you might actually wind up damaging the laser. But you can usually see there's a tab here, and there's a tab on this side. I've already gotten this one off. I've taken it off once. There's actually some glue that's on it, so it might be a little difficult to take off at first. But once you get it off, this is what you're faced with. With these Sony lasers, these things are so fragile and so delicate. I don't recommend anyone who doesn't have a steady hand to try this, because if you make a mistake, you'll destroy your laser. There's no way of putting it back. These lasers the head unit is held in by 4 thin, very thin copper wires, And what that means is if you twist this head unit just a little bit, or if you put too much pressure in the wrong place, you'll throw it out of whack, and it won't be able to read the disc, so you'll get yourself in more of a problem. What we'll talk about here is there's one screw usually that's holding this head unit on. For most of the earlier models, the screw is located in the top. What you would normally do is you would take this screw out like this, and once you get your screw out, your head unit will be held in by some glue, a little bit of glue. And it's not normal glue, it's like more of like a slimy kind of glue that holds the wires in place, and it allows them to flex but not flex too much. So what you'll do after you remove your screw is you'll slowly wiggle this up, and you'll move the top part away, and while keeping it completely stable and not bending any of these 4 wires here, you'll be able to reach the bottom lens, and you'll be able to wipe it off. But like I said, this one is more difficult and more complex, so we're not going to touch this screw. What we are going to do is we're going to keep an eye on, or focus on, these screws here. There's one screw that's here, and there's another screw that's located down here. So what we'll do with the black marker is we'll try to make as best of a mark as we can. Granted, sometimes this isn't perfect, but try to use the finest point marker you have and try to wedge it in there and color the screw as much as you can. The reason why we're trying to color the screw here is we want to know exactly how far it has to go back up when we put it back together. And if you don't mark it, there's a good chance that you'll have one side too high, and you'll have an error as well. So we got one side marked here. I got it as dark as I can and as close down as I can. And then in here, we're going to go and put this in here as close as we can too. Now, once we get these 2 markings done, we're going to take our Phillips screwdriver, and we're going to take these 2 screws out and take this one out. Make sure that you do this in a place where you're not going to lose your screws, and that one will fall out. If you notice, when you take out one side, the side without the spring, it'll pop up. You can probably do this easier if you take out the spring side first. That way you don't have to worry about it flying up and maybe your screw popping out. But take out this next screw over here, and this is the one with our spring on it. And that thing should stay there. Don't try to force it out. If it doesn't want to come out, just leave it there. It's probably better that way. And you'll notice that this head part is going to come off like so. You don't have to bend it very far. You can just hold it up just a little bit, and underneath there you can see the second lens. So what we'll do is we'll take some of our water, and don't use a lot of this, just use a little bit. If you want to get rid of some excess water, you can just roll it on your hand a little bit, and then we're going to go in here and we're going to try and wipe it down a little bit. Once you get it wiped down, take the other side and wipe it off. Make sure it's all clean. And if so, it should sparkle. It should be nice and shiny. And then we're going to carefully put our top back on and put our screw back in. And keep an eye on where the mark is. And I think it's about right there. And I'm going to put our other screw in. And finally, look up at the top, make sure that our paint marks are lined up and they're not over too much. And then finally, if you want to, you can clean off the top here very lightly. Don't wiggle it too much, and wipe it off. Put your top back on, and you should be ready to go slap it back in your system. Make sure you